The conference room smelled like old books and polished wood, the kind of place where money felt comfortable and people like me didn't. I sat with my hands flat on the table, fingers pressed together so tightly they ached, staring at the grain of the oak while the lawyer cleared his throat. His voice was monotone and professional, but every word seemed to carry a private smirk. To my granddaughter Lyanna, I leave the estate, valued at $3.2 million, as well as the investment accounts and property holdings. My sister didn't gasp, she giggled. A sharp, delighted little sound that bounced off the walls. My parents laughed with her, already celebrating a victory they'd always assumed belonged to her. The lawyer slid a check across the table, and Lyanna snatched it up with manicured fingers. She didn't even look at me. I kept my posture straight, pretending my heartbeat wasn't pounding in my ears. I knew I wouldn't get much. I just didn't expect to be reduced to a punchline. And to Julia. The lawyer's pause felt cruel. $1. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, internal snap, like a branch beneath snow. My father leaned back in his chair, amusement dripping from his voice. Go earn your own. My mother didn't hesitate to twist the knife. Some kids just don't measure up, she said, her tone feather-light, as if she were commenting on a grocery list instead of my worth. There was laughter, real, ugly laughter, while I stared at the $1 bill placed before me. Crisp, clean, meaningless. I didn't reach for it. I didn't even blink. I kept my hands on the table, steady, unshaking, as if I could hold myself together through sheer force of stillness, but the lawyer wasn't done. There is one more item. The room quieted, not out of respect, but curiosity. He reached into his folder and produced a small envelope, aged, yellowed, sealed with dark red wax. My name written on it in my grandfather's deliberate handwriting. For Julia, he said. To be opened privately by her, and only her. My mother's smile faltered. Just a flicker. A twitch of panic, quickly smothered, but there. She leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing, gaze glued to the envelope like it might explode. No one laughed now, no one made a joke. For the first time since I walked into that room, I felt something other than humiliation. A pulse of heat in my chest, unfamiliar but grounding. I didn't pick up the letter. I didn't ask questions. I just sat there, hands still on the table, letting the silence swallow the last of their amusement. But that sealed letter, the one my mother's eyes kept darting toward, held something she didn't expect. Something that would change everything. I was 8 when I learned how invisibility worked. Not as magic, but as a quiet subtraction. You don't disappear all at once. You fade in small, ordinary moments until nobody notices you're gone. My mother used to polish Lyanna's trophies every Sunday. The shelf was an entire wall. Gleaming gold dancers, spelling bee plaques, tiny silver cups engraved with her name. She would stand there humming, carefully dusting each one like a priceless artifact. On the bottom shelf, I'd once placed a blue ribbon from the 3rd grade science fair. It wasn't first place. It wasn't fancy. Just a simple participant excellence ribbon with my name printed crookedly. The weekend after I put it there, it disappeared. I didn't ask what happened. I knew better. In our house, items misplaced around Lyanna were accidents. Items misplaced around me were clearing clutter. Father always called trophies real achievements. The kind that meant something. The kind you had to earn with talent. Talent, which apparently I didn't have. While Lyanna went to competitions, rehearsals, camps, I walked the dog, cleaned the kitchen, copied lists, filled the dishwasher, and remembered what everyone forgot. Homework left on counters. Jackets left in restaurants. Glasses left at the golf club. I was the keeper of the overlooked. Father once ruffled my hair, not affectionately but absent-mindedly, like rewarding a pet. "You're steady, Julia," he said. The words were meant as praise, but they landed like a label. Something solid, dependable, unremarkable. Steady girls didn't shine. They supported shining people. The only person who seemed to see me at all was Grandpa Walter. He moved slowly, talked slower, and never rushed a question. He'd take me to the lake house on weekends when my parents were too busy, and Lyanna had somewhere important to be. The lake house smelled like cedar and old stories. Water slapped against the dock with a lazy rhythm, like the world exhaling. It wasn't perfect, peeling paint, creaky stairs, windows that stuck when it rained, but it felt like a place where nothing needed to impress anyone. He kept 2 fishing rods propped against the porch wall. One was smooth, light, store-bought. The other was carved birch, rough in places, initials scratched into the handle. He always handed me the carved one. "It's special," he'd say. "Not because it looks special, but because someone made it with time." I'd watch the lake ripple and think about how quiet it was, how silence out there didn't feel like punishment, just space. People paid attention to the wrong things, he'd tell me. Not the hard-working things, not the patient things. They wanted noise and sparkle. They didn't know how to look deeper. He'd reel in slowly, glancing at me like the words weren't advice but observations. "You see more than you say," he said once. "That'll matter when you're older." Back home, I was reminded of the opposite, a dinner party. While Lionel held court with her medals spread across the table, someone asked my mother if I wanted anything special for my birthday. She laughed, soft and dismissive, without even looking at me. "Oh, Julie doesn't need much." People nodded, relieved. Because that meant they didn't have to consider me. I smiled politely, quietly. But something inside me curled, knowing what she really meant. That sentence stayed with me longer than any argument could have. It was the moment I understood that in this family, needing nothing meant deserving nothing. But Grandpa was teaching me something else entirely. How to see what others miss. Morning light spilled through the lakehouse windows with an almost obnoxious brightness, bouncing off the hardwood floors and white walls, exposing every dust trail, every forgotten corner. The house felt too bright, too busy, like grief had been replaced overnight with logistics and urgency. My parents moved through it like inspectors, clipboards without the clipboards, opening drawers, counting items, whispering numbers. Not a single photograph of my grandfather was lifted with reverence. Everything was evaluated in terms of appraisal value, resale potential, tax implications. I stood by the window, watching the thin layer of frost on the grass melt slowly under the sun. It felt unfair somehow, that nature took its time letting go while my family rushed through it like the world owed them efficiency. Lionel drifted toward me. Coffee in a porcelain mug. She'd never washed a day in her life. Her face was a polished mask of sympathy, the kind people perform on command. "It was a shock for all of us," she murmured. "Not me. Not you. All of us." A collective tragedy that conveniently ignored the fact that the humiliation was mine alone. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice not to fracture. Father was at the dining table. Papers fanned across it, folders stacked, pens lined up, as if running a meeting rather than sorting the remnants of a life. "You'll handle the property taxes," he said to Lionel, sliding a folder her way without hesitation. "And meet with the accountant about the transition." She nodded, already stepping into ownership, already absorbing what she had been given without thought. Mother hummed while she sorted, the same tune she'd played around Lionel's trophies for years. Light, distracted, self-satisfied. She folded linens, examined silverware, made piles labeled with sticky notes. Without looking up, she finally said, "Go earn your own." The same line my father had thrown at me yesterday. Dismissive, rehearsed, now repurposed as a family mantra. No one flinched. No one objected. No one filled the silence with comfort. The only answer was the quiet rustling of papers, the clink of glass, the steady hum of activity. In that moment, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not even shock. Just a cold, clean recognition. They weren't overlooking me. They were erasing me. Not by accident but by design. The way someone deletes a file they no longer need, or throws away a receipt after reimbursement clears. Not malicious, just efficient. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't slam a door or stage a scene dramatic enough to make the air shift. I walked to the front door, placed my hand on the knob, and exhaled once. Then I left with a soft click. Quiet, controlled, deliberate. I left before anyone noticed. And for the first time I wasn't running away. I was running toward something. The truth my grandfather had left behind. The inn sat just off the ridge. A squat building with slanted siding and a hand-painted sign that promised quiet rooms and strong coffee. It wasn't beautiful, but it felt honest, and honesty suddenly mattered more than anything. Rosa, the owner, handed me a brass key with a number etched so deeply it looked carved by frustration rather than machinery. "If you need anything, just holler," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "People come here when something changes. They always look the same, wide awake, even when they're exhausted." I wasn't sure which one I was. The room was small. One desk, one window, one bed. But it smelled of cedar polish and fresh sheets, not money or calculation or legacy. I sat on the thin mattress and took out the sealed envelope I'd carried like a live wire since yesterday. I cracked the wax, unfolded the heavy paper. Inside were 3 things. A small silver key. A sheet of numbers. Dates, initials, amounts. And a line wrote in my grandfather's stern, looping handwriting. "Start where the truth was first bent." I said it aloud once, just to hear it in the air. Then I spread the paper on the desk, pulled out my notebook, and opened my laptop. No tears. No fury. Just work. I began transcribing the numbers, column by column, dates, entry codes, valuations. Some were rounded to the cent, others curved suspiciously into whole numbers, neat and unblemished like someone had sanded the rough edges down. I cross-referenced corporate records, public filings, archived documents meant for no one but auditors and insomniacs. My notebook filled fast. Arrows, boxes, highlights. I color-coded inconsistencies. Yellow for mismatched valuations. Blue for incomplete disclosures. Red for repeating transactions that made no sense at first glance. The red multiplied quickly. Just under review thresholds, always. Always on the 28th of the month. Always signed with my father's initials. Hours passed without asking permission, sliding over me like water. I didn't feel tired. I felt sharpened, like my grandfather's cryptic message had flipped a switch I didn't know I had. I sifted through county ledgers, shell entities, transfer logs, consulting fees tied to organizations that existed only on paper. The kind of infrastructure that doesn't hide money. It launders it until value and ownership become suggestion instead of fact. One entity in particular stood out. Harbor and Clay Holdings. Incorporated during the same month my father sold one of the first family properties. The filings were immaculate, too immaculate, with every amount rounded down by a few thousand. Small enough for no flagged reports, large enough to matter. I sat back, tapping my pen against the desk, staring at my own handwriting like it belonged to someone else. There was no mystery here. No locked vault. No encrypted code. The truth wasn't hiding. It was sitting in plain view, secure in the assumption that no one like me would ever bother to look. I built the timeline. Dates, transactions, property transfers. The signatures lined up with travel dates, campaign dinners, investor lunches. Every successful quarter in our family history wasn't brilliance. It was siphoning. And my grandfather knew. Not from regret, but from observation. He had watched, quietly, methodically, until the evidence wasn't suspicion. It was proof. I looked again at the small key. I had assumed it was symbolic. Metaphor, sentimentality, legacy. But the numbers told another story. One of the assets in Harbor and Clay was listed as non-liquid holdings. Preserved. Preserved. Not stored. Not sold. Locked. Somewhere physical. Somewhere old. Somewhere familiar. I pictured the lake house. The study. The heavy cabinet with the dual locks, one broken, one still intact, a cabinet no one ever opened, because no one believed anything valuable was inside. But my grandfather believed differently. He hadn't given me vengeance. He'd given me a map. I closed my notebook, lines of red ink still drying. I knew exactly where that key belonged. And I knew that when I opened that cabinet, there would be no going back. But maybe that was exactly what Grandpa intended. Twilight clung to the woods like smoke when I pulled up the gravel drive. The lake house glowed softly in the distance, windows lit from within, silhouettes shifting as my family dissected a future they believed already belonged to them. Their cars were parked with intentional symmetry. Luxury SUVs and sedans positioned neatly like pieces on a board, each one representing a player convinced they were in control of the game. I parked farther down, where the trees swallowed headlights and intentions. Before I even reached the porch, I heard them, voices rising and falling in confident rhythm, all business, no grief. They weren't mourning a man. They were inventorying what he left behind. If we roll it into the portfolio before Q3, we'll see a 6 to 8% return, my father said, his voice clipped energized. To do that, we need access to the full transaction history, Lyanna added, trying on authority like a blazer she wasn't sure fit. Then my mother, smooth, dismissive. Julia will stay out of this. She never had the mind for complex matters. A pause, followed by the kind of collective agreement that didn't need words, that, more than anything, sharpened my resolve. I slipped through the back door into a corridor dark enough to swallow me whole. The air had that lake house smell. Cedar, old books, dust warmed by heat vents. It felt like stepping into a different time, one that knew more than it said. The study was exactly as I remembered. The heavy wooden desk, the tall shelf of legal texts, the outdated lamp that buzzed faintly. But now, every object hummed with purpose. I knelt in front of the bottom cabinet, the one everyone assumed was jammed or empty, and fitted the key into the cold metal lock. It clicked open with a single decisive sound, like a verdict being passed. Inside were binders lined up by year, each labeled in my grandfather's block handwriting. Beneath them, manila folders stuffed with printed emails, spreadsheets, and signed documents. A handheld recording device with a faded timestamp display sat on top, as if waiting its turn to testify. I flipped open a binder. Column after column of rounded payments. Repeating dates. Signatures that matched my father's. Legal phrasing crafted to be technically correct but morally vacant. Not mistakes. Not oversights. Patterns. The kind of patterns only someone patient and meticulous would bother to trace. Grandpa hadn't stumbled onto the truth. He had built a case. I scanned the margins. Notes in his handwriting. Flag this amount. Observe repeat behavior. Projected laundering cycle. Not angry scribbles, methodical annotations. There were printed emails, too, threads between my father and partners, discussing reallocation strategies, asset privacy, and minimizing exposure. Nothing explicitly illegal if read casually. Plenty illegal if read correctly. My skin prickled. Not with fear, but with recognition. This was the system he'd hidden. Not to bury the truth, but preserve it. I set the binder down and reached for another folder. When I pulled it free, the shelf shifted, just a fraction. Enough to expose a small metallic lens tucked behind a stack of books, a camera. Old but functional. The kind designed to record, store, and quietly upload. He didn't just collect documents. He recorded conversations, meetings, confessions. The lake house had been listening for years. I traced the wire leading from the camera to a compact box tucked beneath the shelf, labeled with a strip of tape. Backup, external and remote online. Digital copies. Redundant storage. Failsafes. Damn, why grandfather hadn't trusted anyone to do the right thing. He trusted architecture. Systems. Evidenced. I understood then. This wasn't built for revenge. This was built for exposure. A machine designed to reveal, not punish, and I wasn't the beneficiary, I was the executor. The one who would take data, context, and truth, and make it undeniable. I closed the binder, my hands steady in a way they hadn't been at the will reading. I wasn't shaking now. I wasn't overwhelmed, I was ready. I shut the cabinet quietly, slid the key into my pocket, and stood in the dim study where the air felt electric with possibility. Tomorrow, the walls would finally speak. And this time, everyone would have to listen. Morning arrived with a strained kind of brightness, the kind that made everything look staged rather than lived in. My parents sat at the dining table dressed too formally for a house they treated more like a transaction than a memory. Lyanna sat beside them, posture immaculate, eyes darting between her phone and her parents' expressions. They were composed, polished, and unervingly calm, like executives waiting for a quarterly report, not a family facing the aftermath of death. Then came the knock. 3 measured taps against the frame. Polite, unapologetic. I opened the door before anyone else could react. Boone stood there, taller than I remembered, suit pressed, glasses reflecting the morning light. He carried a leather folder and a small device the size of an old cassette deck. His eyes found mine first, and he gave a subtle nod. Not greeting, acknowledgement. Recognition of role. "May we sit?" he asked, though he was already moving to the table. My father straightened. "We weren't expecting guests." Boone ignored it, placing the device on the table and flipping open the folder. "This won't take long. Walter left instructions." He pressed a button, and my grandfather's voice filled the room, rougher than I remembered, age-worn into the consonants. "If you're hearing this, it means Julia has already found what you hoped would never be discovered." My mother's fingers froze around her coffee cup. The screen on Boone's device flickered to life, projecting footage onto the blank wall, time-stamped video from the lake house study. There they were, my parents and Lionel, rifling through drawers, discarding items, discussing resale value with clinical detachment. My mother's recorded voice filled the air, casual, bored. "The house will fetch more once we remove his junk." Footage shifted. Another day, another room. My father, holding papers. "If we convert before Q3, we can bury the transfer. It'll go unnoticed. Lionel. And Julia won't know enough to ask questions." Back in the present, my mother exhaled sharply. "This is taken out of context." Boone didn't look at her. He laid printed financial records across the table. Columns of dates, amounts, signatures. Red flags visible to even the untrained My father leaned forward, jaw clenched. "Old paperwork. Misinterpreted." Boone clicked another button. Grandfather's voice again, low, tired, but certain. "I documented everything. And I have made sure that if this is challenged, the record speaks, louder than any denial." The room pulsed with a sudden, suffocating quiet. My mother turned toward me, panic replacing poise. "Julia, stop this. This isn't how we handle family matters." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Boone lifted another document, thick with seals and signatures. "These are Walter's final directives." He read them aloud, each word weighted with deliberation. "Effective immediately, Julia inherits controlling interest in the Walter Research Foundation." Lionel's chair scraped backward. "What? That's impossible." My father shot forward, face flushed. "This can be contested." Boone didn't blink. "If contested, all remaining assets default to the foundation. And the legal review of past advisory work begins." Silence. Heavy, decisive, unforgiving. My father's bravado drained so quickly it felt physical, like someone had pulled a plug. My mother looked at the folder, the device, the evidence, calculating futures collapsing like dominoes. I reached into my pocket and placed the small key, my grandfather's key, on the table. The metal hit wood with a soft clink, and my mother flinched, as if it were a gavel. No speeches. No victory lap. Just quiet acknowledgement. An ending written long before anyone realized the beginning had shifted across the room. The projector light flickered off, leaving only daylight and the sound of shallow breathing. No one moved, no one spoke. The reversal wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Behind them, the lake stayed still. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. The house felt impossibly large once the cars pulled away, leaving nothing but the soft hum of wind against the window panes. Julia stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the lingering scent of cedar and old paper. Her grandfather's scent, stubborn and steady, refusing to be erased the way her parents had tried to erase everything that mattered. She moved to his desk, fingers brushing the grooves in the wood where decades of thought had pressed themselves into shape. The drawers were empty now, the secrets revealed, the war finished. And yet nothing about it felt like a victory lap. No fire, no triumphant monologue. Just an exhale she hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. She slipped outside, following the path to the dock, the wood soft beneath her shoes from early autumn rain. Her grandfather once sat here with her, legs dangling over the edge, saying, "Still water tells the truth if you know how to listen." Tonight, there were no echoes of family voices cluttering the air. No accusations, no performance. The sun broke through a gray bank of clouds, painting a thin gold stripe across the lake like someone underlining the sentence she hadn't read yet. Julia lowered herself to the dock's edge, the cold air grazing her skin not as punishment, but as permission. It wasn't the documents or recordings that changed anything, she realized. It was the silence that followed. And this quiet, this stillness, belonged to her now. If this story stayed with you, linger a moment. Sometimes the quietest victories are the ones that echo longest. What truth have you been too quiet about? Maybe it's time to let it speak.